Hi everyone, welcome back to day 2 of the FOREU4ALL workshop project, aligning project management and impact. Small announcement before we get started. If you have any luggage that you need stored, there's a room in the back that they can store your luggage for you, or if you find a member of the Arqus team, they can also take it to a space on the ground floor. So just a practical announcement before we get started. First off, I'm Audrey Sullivan-Riley. I'm the Monitoring, Evaluation, and Learning Officer for the Circle U University Alliance. I was one of the team members working on putting together the workshop on challenges yesterday. I was working with Angela Kiff and Marissa Biarroel, and they were a big part of that too, so they're not on the stage, but I wanted to recognize them a bit. And as a recap, yesterday we spent much of the morning discussing a lot of the major themes and challenges that our alliances face when we try to align project management and impact. And as you can see, we have 5 really lovely rapporteurs. You might have seen them in your rooms yesterday. Would you guys go ahead and actually introduce yourselves, please? We'll start with Fernando, yeah?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Fernando Dalan, Executive Director from EU Connexus.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Delphine Kloet. I'm a project manager for Enlight, based at Ghent University, Belgium.
Good morning. My name is Julia Cora. I'm a policy and funding advisor at the UFA Central Office in Brussels.
Hi, my name is Patricia van Hemert. I'm institutional coordinator for Eureka, and my home base is the Amsterdam University of Applied Science.
Good morning, my name is Laura Collot and I work for the FOREU4ALL Alliance as project manager, and I'm based in the General Secretariat in Brussels.
Super, thank you guys. So our rapporteurs are here today to share some reflections as they were in your rooms listening to all of the things that you were discussing. And we wanted to share these reflections with everyone as we had 5 rooms, and we wanted to align maybe these key themes that we had as a lot of important things were brought up during these discussions. And we really want to reflect to kind of set the tone also for the rest of the day. So we want to later today discuss some tools, the solutions and plans that we can actually use to address these challenges. I do want to clarify that, of course, we spent 2.5 hours discussing these challenges yesterday, and our rapporteurs have about 4 or 5 minutes each to go through one of these topics. So it won't be everything, and we'll focus maybe more on the first 4 rounds and leave the solutions a bit for you all to discuss more this afternoon. So they'll focus on kind of these more key discussions you had in the first 4 rounds, as I said. So with that, maybe we can go ahead and start with Fernando, who will talk about the first table within your rooms, which was planning for impact.
Thank you, Audrey. As you can imagine, it's not easy to condense such a discussion in 4 minutes, but I will try to send the main messages. So indeed, one of the things discussed was that planning for impact is still underdeveloped in many alliances, and it's not embedded since the beginning in the alliance logic. So it's very difficult to address it, and normally it's addressed later at the reporting stage. There is a lack of shared definition, or at least shared understanding of different concepts like outputs, outcomes, impact, KPIs, performance, transformation, and they are often mixed up. There is obviously a strong tension between the project logic and the alliance logic. So we are all engaged in short-term delivery of outputs and reporting, and not so much this often match with the long-term institutional transformation aspects that we want to keep. Impact also normally takes time and is often indirect. There is relational and cumulative, and it's harder to evidence than immediate outputs that we may have in the project. The problem is not only methodological, it also is strategical and organizational. And sometimes there is also unclear ownership between weak institutional embedding, fragmented data, limited alignment, and normally also with QA, but also with governance and decision making. Alliances sometimes are too much focused on KPIs and quantitative reporting, and not enough in terms of qualitative evidence, reflection, and meaningful change. One of the key issues is who defines impact, or who actually creates stories for defining impact for different actors, such as the alliance itself, the institutions that are members of the alliance, the funder or funders we may have, the stakeholders, and so many other people affected by the work we do. One of the main risks is not only weak reporting, but also missing the opportunity of wider transformation for the alliances and our ecosystems. Other of the discussion points were the need for a shared methodology from the very start, with clear concepts, better mixed methods for evidence, a stronger integration into the strategy and decision making. And the overall message indeed is that impact must be built into the Alliance since the very beginning, and not only added afterwards in the reporting exercises.
Thank you very much, Fernando. Yes, please, clap. You said so many things I want to respond to, but I think one of the things you said was about finding our scope linked to planning for impact, and I think it sounds really simple on paper, but it's really, really hard, and it takes a lot of time. And I think the ownership aspect is super crucial, and all of those things are linked to one another. And it's really easy to say starting from the beginning, but we're also having this discussion many years after we've started this initiative of the alliances. So I think it's also a discussion of, if we haven't, how do you then start maybe a couple of years later? So super interesting. Maybe I'll hop to Delphine, who will talk a bit about the data collection and analysis points.
Yes, thank you. The conversations showed quite a consistent picture across alliances. The challenge is not so much the absence of data, but how data is coordinated, understood, and used. And it's clear that we need meaningful, reliable, and well-defined data. There are many data practices across alliances, both for quantitative and qualitative data. And these methods are valuable, but they sometimes lack purpose and alignment across work packages or within institutions. And the result is fragmentation rather than a coherent system. Several underlying causes appeared. First, often there is no detailed alliance-level data approach, and thus there's a lack of standards and guidance, which makes the data hard to compare. Second, survey fatigue, widespread. So low response rates directly undermine the data quality. Third aspect, clear data infrastructure gaps, so we lack tools. Many alliances still rely heavily on Excel-based, yes, we all admit it, and other manual processes, even if there are shifts to move towards Power BI, central platforms, and automation. Fourth aspect, roles and expertise are often unclear. Data collection and analysis are frequently not really defined as explicit tasks, and required skills are often limited. And finally, data protection and different regulations play a major role. Different national and institutional interpretations of GDPR make alignment difficult, so personal data often has to remain at institutional level, complicating alliance-wide analysis. The discussions made clear that this is not just a technical challenge, but it's also a governance and culture issue. Some key tensions which were mentioned, standardization versus flexibility. Alliances often need common indicators, but then work packages or academics at institutions require more tailored information. Quantitative versus qualitative data. Numbers are easier to aggregate and report, but learning and impact really depends on interpretation, reflection, and dialogue, which is harder to do. Takes more time. Alliance needs versus institutional needs. We should really try to avoid duplication and at the same time allow some flexibility. And efficiency versus ethics. And there's also some human-centered data principles that should guide what kind of sensitive information, for instance, that we are collecting. But one message appeared repeatedly, although data collection is often shared as a responsibility, so it's everybody's responsibility, but ownership and leadership is really needed. Some risks, if these challenges remain unresolved, that arise. A risk of declining data quality over time if we start changing indicators or move from manual to automation, or if we have inconsistent procedures. Sometimes there's a risk of conflict of interest. We have pressure to report to obtain our funding or to maintain our funding. This could lead to inflation or adjustment of figures. Several groups stressed a gap between the data collection and the data use. Raw numbers are sometimes produced but not transformed into meaningful information that can inform our decision or learning. And finally, alliances, but Fernando, you also mentioned that, alliances risk focusing predominantly on outputs and short-term outcomes, while long-term impact often remains largely invisible. So I think the central message for this topic for data collection is clear. If we coordinate our efforts, if we align our approaches, if we use a mix of methods with enough capacity behind them, then data can become more than a reporting requirement. It can really help alliances learn, improve, and see the real impact of their work.
Thank you, Delphine. I think you already had the perfect transition to Julia's topic as well, actually. So I'll actually go ahead and move directly to you. Thank you again, Delphine. And Julia will talk about evidence use and management, hence the good transition from Delphine.
Thank you. So our discussion indeed focused on a central question is how data and evidence are actually used or not used to inform strategy and decision making in alliances. And what emerged is not really a technical issue, but rather a systemic challenge involving interpretation, governance, and alignment. So what we observed in terms of challenge is that we have data, but interpretation can very much vary, and this may lead to diverse and sometimes diverging diagnoses as to what caused a certain problem. Additionally, there is a gap between assessment and action. Translating data into concrete management decision is not automatic, and again, it requires interpretation. There is also a tension in terms of timeframes, which I think is touched upon in all the group. The ambitions for impact are high, but the time to achieve and demonstrate it is very short. And impact also remains a punctual exercise that is not embedded into institutional routines and not necessarily considered as a tool to base decisions upon. In terms of underlying causes, a key issue that was mentioned by participants in the groups is that the data collected is often driven by European Commission and project requirements rather than by what is strategically useful for universities or alliances. It may overlap, but not necessarily, and we may miss on certain data for this. Another problem, quite different, was rather relating to staff and the position of staff within the institutional hierarchy, which varies significantly across institutions. So in some cases, those who are responsible for project management and impact, they are closely connected to the rector, and that allows for very quick decision making, whereas in others, there are multiple layers and decision loop of validation before it reaches a level where decisions can be taken. And this institutional diversity in governance can hinder decision making based on evidence collected, because the people involved in the day-to-day management of the alliance, they lack the authority to implement the changes that are required. In terms of tensions and trade-offs, there are several things that appear. The first is, I think, what we all touched upon already, the balance between short-term measurable delivery versus long-term meaningful impact. Focusing on what is measurable and required in the short term supports reporting and accountability, but it can also divert attention from deeper systemic changes that require time and are harder to grasp. There also can be, in some cases, structural mismatches between alliance-level ambitions and individual university strategies. So this challenge came across multiple topics, and it reflects a deeper structural issue. In a way, alliances operate a bit as mini-EU, let's say, where common objectives need to be reconciled with institutional autonomy. And as in the EU, there are trade-offs which lie between collective alignment at alliance level and ownership at institutional level, especially because there are changes of rectorships, changes of teams that can shift priorities and disrupt this long-term planning that's made at alliance level. We also have a trade-off in terms of capacity constraint and continuity of impact. Alliances rely on limited staff and evolving teams, but staff turnovers and resources constraints undermine continuity as well. And finally, evidence-based decision-making versus governance reality. Ideally, data should inform decisions, but in practice, decisions depend on hierarchies, on influence, and on access to leadership, not only on evidence. So if unresolved, there were many risks that people came up with, but the most immediate risk is demotivation and disengagement. When data is collected but not meaningfully used, partners stop seeing its value, and that weakened ownership in the alliance. We may lose momentum, we may have uninformed decision-making without clear interpretation or collection and connection to governance. Decisions rely on intuition rather than evidence. And finally, loss of credibility. So there is a gap between reporting and actual use of data, which undermine the trust internally and externally, including potentially with funders. So generally, this affects the long-term sustainability of the alliance. And without clear evidence of value and impact, alliances struggle to adapt, justify investment, and to simply continue. So to summarize, overall, the challenge is not the absence of data, but rather the difficulty of turning data into shared meaning, aligned decisions, and long-term strategic impact management.
Thank you. Lots to unpack on that one as well. I think one of the things you said at the beginning really stood out to me, and it was assessment versus action. And I think there's often a disconnect because they have to go hand in hand. Sometimes the assessments are not easy, but the easy part in some ways. But then to ask, again, to have actions following those assessments. And I think a big point that you made as well is when we say evidence-based decision-making as well, evidence can influence the decisions we make, but there are so many other factors that go into that, whether they're political, other things going on in the world. So I think it's great that we can have this discussion, and it's a really big influence into the work that we're doing in our alliances. But there are so many other moving parts too that we have to consider. And of course, when you said impact embedding into our institutional structures and routines, I think we're all very familiar with those challenges. And I always think about how you're trying to align 9 different processes of data collection, at least in my alliance, and it's not an easy feat, and I'm sure everyone else feels the same. So thank you for that, Julia. We can move on now to Patricia, who's going to talk a bit about communications and societal accountability.
Yeah, thank you. Well, overall, there was a agreement across the groups, although communication and societal accountability may be supporting functions, as we learned yesterday morning. They are at the same time central to achieving real impact. However, they are currently fragmented, inconsistently understood, and often undervalued. So I will try to share with you some of the key findings. First, across all groups, there is a lack of clarity around impact and communication. Many participants ask fundamental questions. What do we mean by impact? Who defines it? And who are we communicating to and why? This ambiguity creates confusion between internal and external communication, and between communication and dissemination. And as a result, efforts are often inconsistent and not strategically aligned. Second, there is a disconnect between actors. We see gaps between internal teams and external stakeholders, universities and alliance level structures, and communication professionals and project leaders. This is compounded by language barriers, different priorities, and institutional silos, which make coordination difficult. Third, stakeholder engagement is limited or uneven. Several groups highlighted that external stakeholders are not always clearly identified or meaningfully involved. Communication often remains within academic circles. Local communities and non-academic actors are underengaged. And this may lead to a perception that alliances are niches or not relevant to the broader society. Fourth, there are structural and resource constraints. These include lack of dedicated resources for communication, limited tools to measure impact, and tensions between centralized and decentralized communication approaches. Finally, there is a risk dimension, the risk of losing relevance if communication doesn't reach the right audiences, the risk of reputational damage, and the risk of failing to demonstrate the value of public funding. So, some of the main conclusions. Communication is not just dissemination, it's strategic and transformative. All groups converged on the idea that communication should not be an afterthought. It must be embedded in the core mission and used as a tool to shape systems, influence stakeholders, and drive societal change. 2, impact must be co-defined and better articulated. Impact is currently fragmented and sometimes invisible. There is a need to move beyond metrics and include qualitative, long-term, and societal dimensions co-created with stakeholders. And 3, alliances must shift from inward-looking to outward-facing. There is a strong recognition that alliances need to engage broader audiences, communicate in accessible ways, and build trust and relevance beyond academia. The challenge is not only to do impactful work, but to make that impact visible, understood, and shared.
Thank you. I think our Circle U comms officer is watching from Brussels, and she's probably cheering in her office with a lot of the things that you said. So I think one is that you said communications is not dissemination. There's strategy behind it, especially linked to what we choose to share, also related to impact. I think also how we report impact and how we communicate it to different stakeholders changes, obviously. And so I think what you said there was really interesting. And also another thing I remember directly from the room I was in, is we talked a bit about the difference between marketing and communications as well, and whether that's something that we're actually doing in our alliances, and there's a key difference there too. So I think it's super interesting here. And a good transition to our last topic as well, to Laura, who will talk a bit about aligning project and alliance logistics.
Thanks, and first of all, apologize, I won't look at you, lovely audience, because in order to stick to the 5 minutes time frame, I need to look at my bullet points, so apologize for that. Actually, the group I was responsible to report of was discussing aligning project and alliance logics. As all the other groups, we focused on challenges, causes, risks, and finally on the solutions and recommendations, which I really think we will have the occasion to discuss, because we came up with very nice creative recommendations as well for institutions and the European Commission. The challenges we identified first is the time frame connected to the project logics. The project logic is short-term, while alliance ambitions are long-term. So it's difficult to create real impact, to measure real impact within the project timelines. The alliance is expected to deliver systemic change, yet it operates within restrictive project frameworks. Related to that, we know that the staff, is hired on temporary project funding, and this creates instability in our personal lives and professional lives. Consequence, high turnover, constant clash between priorities of the project, us, and the alliance impact. Then there is a project mentality tension. Within institutions, staff and the stakeholders navigate between local institutional roles and top-down alliance structures. It seems sometimes the alliance strategy is not integrated into the institutional strategy, and this reinforces again the project mentality. What is the challenge for us is that sometimes we have issues, challenges in engage middle management structures, for example, because we are considered as project managers, so we are sent to the project responsible within the institution. Moreover, although the legal entity is seen as a very important role for coordination, facilitating coordination among universities, it's always perceived as something external. How do we communicate with that? Finally, the roles, project managers, alliance manager, secretary general, sometimes are unclear in terms of responsibilities. Focusing on our role, project managers, we have responsibility, but sometimes we lack of authority to go forward. So this seems like the governance and implementation structures are not aligned. And again, alliance strategy, it's not always prioritized. This changes with governances, leaderships at the institutional level. Sometimes you have leaders very into alliance, and then it changes, and everything changes, and then it's difficult to plan. Finally, of course, communication. If we cannot plan on the long term, it's also difficult to find a communication strategy on the long term. It's also difficult to address different target group. If there is high turnover, we cannot create this impression of a real connection, of real relation. So yeah, sometimes this creates little awareness of the alliance and then less impact. Three main causes, actually, which are aligned to that. The first one is short-term and uncertain funding, both from the side of the institutions and of the Commission and public authorities. Then immature and governance structures of the alliances, and again, sometimes or often the alliance strategy is not enough integrated in institutional strategy, as also mentioned by Fernando and Julia. What about the consequences this may cause? Activities are prioritized over impact. The focus shifts to deliver activities, report, rather than actually focusing on long-term impact, but that was already, I think, mentioned by Delphine and Fernando. We have this short-term survival mindset. Energy is spent on securing future funding, keeping our jobs rather than building sustainable transformation. And then, limited institutional transformation. We want alliances to have impact to ensure a competitive higher education in Europe, but we cannot do that because we focus on very short-term activities. And then there is I called it like a sort of strategic paradox. We are asked to be political, actually, to create European identity, but we actually need to make sure that in the present we can exist and we give the reason to exist. What about the risks? Discontinuity. Again, alliances risk to remain niche projects and not to ensure a long-term structural embedding. Turnover and instability. Temporary contracts create insecurity for staff, limiting continuity and long-term thinking. Lack of integration. Alliance activities may remain disconnected from the university structure, and this can reduce their transformative potential. It hasn't been mentioned, but we reduce opportunity for students. If we cannot give students a long-term offer, something which is available on the long term, we lose credibility and they lose opportunities. Governance gaps. Without strong central coordination or a legal entity, alliances risk losing direction, leadership, and strategic coherence. And then conflict with institutional strategy. If we continue reasoning in the project-based role and logic, we really lack to access institutional processes, creating friction, and most of the time misalignment. I want to conclude saying that we also had many good practices and good recommendations, and I really hope there will be the opportunity to discuss.
We have time for that.
And also on behalf of all my colleagues, thank the organizer because it's a really lovely event, very well organized, and it helps really exchanging on these challenges, and it's not always easy, so thanks a lot.
Very good. Thank you, Laura. Thank you all very much. I would maybe just end on a few points. The first being that I just want to emphasize that these challenges are not mutually exclusive. They're all very much interlinked with one another, as we saw a lot of the points kind of overlapped very clearly. And I don't think we can solve each challenge individually, but we have to address them collectively. Maybe reflecting on this as well, I think it's very clear that all of our alliances are having different circumstances. We're in different journeys in our project management and impact journeys, to be honest, and we really have an opportunity to share best practices and to share our experiences and to mutually reinforce one another, which is my not so subtle transition to our workshop on toolboxes. And I think as a technical reminder, you'll go to the same room that you were in yesterday morning for the workshop on challenges. This is on the left side of your badge. We're not going to ask you to run to the room, but we will ask you to kind of make your way there directly if you can, so we can get started. And thank you again to all of you here. I think you guys really encompassed it in 4 minutes, right? Give or take a few minutes, but thank you guys again for all the work and for the facilitators of the workshop. Thank you.